He said she'd never be a mother 6. Years later, she showed up with twins at his wedding. The sterile walls of the medical center felt like they were closing in on Rachel Turner as she gripped her husband's hand. 3 years of trying, 3 years of hope, turning to despair with every negative test. Now, sitting across from Dr. Williams, she felt her world crumbling. "I'm sorry, Rachel," the doctor said gently. "The test results show severe damage to your fallopian tubes from the infection last year. Natural pregnancy is highly unlikely." Words hit like a physical blow. Rachel turned to her husband James, searching his face for comfort, but found only a cold mask of disappointment. The man who once promised to love her through everything now looked at her like she was broken. "What are our options?" Rachel asked, her voice barely a whisper. "IVF could be attempted, but given the extent of the damage, success rates are low. There's also surrogacy or adoption." James stood abruptly. "We'll discuss this at home," he said curtly, already heading for the door. The drive home was suffocating. Rachel stared out the window at families walking with their children, each sight twisting the knife deeper. When they reached their suburban home, James went straight to his study and slammed the door. That evening, his mother Victoria arrived unannounced. Rachel knew this conversation was coming. Victoria had never hidden her disapproval of their marriage, always making comments about grandchildren and family legacy. "James told me about your condition," Victoria said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "How unfortunate. It's not a condition. It's a medical situation that we're dealing with," Rachel replied. Trying to keep her voice steady, Victoria's mask slipped. "Let's be honest, dear. You've failed at the most basic requirement of being a wife. The Patterson family has always had children. It's our tradition." "Tradition doesn't pay the bills," Rachel shot back. "James works himself to death trying to fix the mess his father left behind in the business. What exactly are we preserving here?" Victoria's face flushed with anger. "How dare you speak about my family that way? You're nothing but a burden now." The slap came without warning, sharp and humiliating. Rachel's hand flew to her burning cheek as Victoria continued her assault. "You will not disrespect me in my son's house," Victoria hissed. "This is my house too," Rachel said quietly, though. She wasn't sure that was true anymore. Heavy footsteps thundered down the stairs. James appeared, looking disheveled and annoyed. "What's all the shouting about?" he demanded. "Your wife," Victoria said smoothly, "was just explaining why she thinks she deserves to remain your wife despite her obvious shortcomings." Rachel waited for James to defend her, to say something, anything. But he just stood there, silent and distant. "Mom's just worried about our future," he finally said, not even looking at Rachel. In that moment, something inside Rachel shattered beyond repair. The next morning, she found divorce papers on the kitchen table with a check for $50,000. James had already packed his bags. "I'm sorry it came to this," he said without meeting her eyes. "But I need a wife who can give me children. No, I need a complete family." Rachel watched him leave, taking nothing but his clothes and his cowardice. She stood in the empty house, surrounded by the ghosts of their dreams, and realized she wasn't the one who was broken. She was the one who was finally free. That afternoon, she packed her few belongings and left the house that had never really been hers. She found a small apartment across town, tiny but clean, and for the first time in months she could breathe. She had lost everything. But she had also gained something precious, the chance to discover who she really was without someone else's expectations defining her worth. As she unpacked her boxes in the fading light, Rachel made herself a promise. She would not just survive this betrayal, she would thrive. And someday, somehow, she would prove that her worth had never been tied to her ability to bear children. 6 months after the divorce, Rachel had built a new life from the ashes of her old one. She worked as a freelance graphic designer, taking classes at night to improve her skills. Her tiny apartment had become a sanctuary filled with art supplies, books, and plants that thrived under her care. One morning, she woke up feeling nauseous. At first, she blamed it on the Chinese takeout from the night before. But when it happened again the next day, a terrifying thought crept into her mind. It couldn't be possible. The doctors had said it was virtually impossible. 3 pregnancy tests later, she sat on her bathroom floor, staring at the positive results in disbelief. Her hands trembled as she called her doctor, who confirmed what the tests had shown. Against all odds, she was pregnant. Sometimes the body heals itself in ways we don't expect, Dr. Williams explained during her appointment. The pregnancy appears to be progressing normally, but we'll need to monitor you closely. Rachel left the clinic in a daze. She was going to be a mother. The very thing that had destroyed her marriage was now happening naturally. The irony was almost too much to bear. That night, she sat in her apartment, one hand on her still flat stomach, and wrestled with a difficult decision. Should she tell James? He was the father, after all. But the memory of his cold rejection still stung, and Victoria's threats echoed in her mind. After a sleepless night, she decided to try. She called James's number, but it went straight to voicemail. She tried again the next day and the day after that. Finally, a woman answered. Double quotes. Hello, this is James's phone. Can I help you? Rachel's heart sank. I'm looking for James Patterson. This is Rachel, his ex-wife. I need to speak with him. There was a pause, then whispered voices in the background. The woman returned, her voice now cold and formal. James doesn't want to speak with you. Please don't call again. Wait, I just need to tell him something important. The line went dead. Rachel tried calling from different numbers, but each time the calls were blocked or ignored. Finally, she drove to the office building where James worked, hoping to catch him in person. But the security guard at the front desk told her that James had left strict instructions not to let her up. Desperate, she went to Victoria's house. The older woman answered the door with a look of disgust. What are you doing here? Haven't you caused enough trouble? I need to speak with James. It's important. He's moved on, as he should. I suggest you do the same. Rachel took a deep breath. I'm pregnant. Victoria's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. And who exactly is the father? James. The baby is his. Victoria stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. You're a desperate woman clinging to a man who's finally free of you. If you try to force this fantasy on him, I'll destroy you. I have money, lawyers, and influence. I'll make sure you lose everything, including that baby. The threat hung in the air like poison. Rachel looked into Victoria's eyes and saw the truth. This woman would do exactly what she promised. She had the power and the ruthlessness to make Rachel's life a living hell. Fine, Rachel whispered. I'll leave him alone. As she walked back to her car, she wasn't the same woman who had come to beg. That woman was gone. The one walking away now was a survivor, carrying within her the most precious gift she had ever received. She drove home through the city streets, one hand protectively over her stomach. She didn't need James or his family. She would raise this child alone, with all the love and strength she possessed. And someday, when her child asked about their father, she would tell them the truth, that some people aren't strong enough to handle the greatest gifts life offers. The next 8 months were the hardest and most beautiful of Rachel's life. She worked from home as much as possible, taking on extra projects to save money for the baby's arrival. Her tiny apartment was transformed into a nursery, with soft, yellow walls and a crib she had painted herself. At her 20-week ultrasound, Dr. Williams gave her news that changed everything. Congratulations, Rachel. You're having twins. Rachel stared at the screen, watching 2 tiny hearts beating in perfect rhythm. Twins. After being told she could never have children, she was carrying 2 babies. The miracle seemed almost too good to be true. Are they healthy? She asked, tears streaming down her face. They appear to be developing normally. We'll continue to monitor them closely, but everything looks good. Rachel left the appointment with ultrasound pictures clutched in her hands. She had no one to share the news with, no family, no friends who understood what this meant. She didn't need anyone else. She had her babies, and they had her. The pregnancy wasn't easy. She developed complications that required bed rest in the final months. Her savings dwindled as she couldn't work, and she had to rely on government assistance for the first time in her life. But she never regretted her choice to keep the babies. When labor began 3 weeks early, Rachel was alone in her apartment. She managed to call 911 before the contractions became too intense. The paramedics arrived just in time, and she gave birth to her son in the back of the ambulance. "It's a boy," the paramedic announced as they pulled up to the hospital. "We're not done yet." 20 minutes later, in the hospital delivery room, her daughter arrived. Both babies were small, but healthy, their cries filling the room with the most beautiful sound Rachel had ever heard. "What are their names?" the nurse asked. Rachel looked at her son, then at her daughter, and felt a peace she had never known. "Before, Nathan," she said, touching her son's tiny hand, "and Hope. Nathan and Hope Turner, her family." Her miracle, the next few months were a blur of sleepless nights, countless feedings, and pure exhaustion. Rachel's world shrank to the size of her apartment, but it was filled with more love than she had ever imagined possible. She documented every moment, first smiles, first sounds, first attempts to roll over. She started a blog about single motherhood, sharing her story and connecting with other women who were raising children alone. The blog grew popular, and she began getting offers for freelance writing projects that paid better than her graphic design work. Slowly, she built a new career around her story. She wrote articles about resilience, about finding strength in unexpected places, about the different ways families could be formed. Her words resonated with thousands of readers who had faced similar challenges. As Nathan and Hope grew from infants to toddlers, Rachel watched them develop their own personalities. Nathan was serious and observant, always studying the world around him. Hope was fearless and joyful, approaching life with boundless curiosity. They were perfect, and they were hers. One evening, as she was putting them to bed, Nathan looked up at her with his father's eyes. "Mama, why don't we have a daddy?" Rachel's heart clenched, but she had prepared for this question. Some families have a mommy and a daddy, and some families have just a mommy or just a daddy. What matters is that we love each other very much. "Love you, Mama," Nathan said, wrapping his small arms around her neck. "I love you too, sweetheart, both of you, more than all the stars in the sky." As she turned off the lights and watched her children sleep, Rachel reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The pain of her divorce had seemed unbearable at the time, but it had led to this moment, this perfect, imperfect family that she had built with her own hands and heart. She was no longer the broken woman who had begged for scraps of affection. She was Nathan and Hope's mother, and that was the most important title she would ever hold. 6 years had passed since Rachel's divorce, and her life had transformed in ways she never could have imagined. Her blog had grown into a successful business, with book deals and speaking engagements that allowed her to support her family comfortably. Nathan and Hope were now in first grade, bright and curious children who filled her days with laughter and wonder. Rachel had built a good life for them in their new city. Far from the painful memories of her marriage, she had friends, a career she loved, and most importantly, she had peace. The wounds from her past had healed, leaving only faint scars that reminded her of her strength. Then, one ordinary Tuesday morning, everything changed. Rachel was making breakfast when her phone buzzed with a news alert. Local business leader James Patterson announces engagement to socialite Catherine Westbrook. The accompanying photo showed James looking older but still handsome. With his arm around a blonde woman in an expensive dress, Rachel stared at the screen, feeling a familiar ache in her chest. Not because she still loved him, that feeling had died years ago, but because of what this meant for Nathan and Hope. Their father was starting a new life, and they still didn't know he existed. "Mommy, you're burning the pancakes," Hope called out, snapping Rachel back to the present. She quickly turned off the stove and served breakfast to her children, pushing the news out of her mind. But later that day, after the kids were at school, she found herself researching the engagement. The wedding was set for the following month. It was going to be a grand affair at the city's most prestigious venue. That evening, as she tucked Nathan and Hope into bed, Nathan asked the question that had been haunting her thoughts. "Mommy, will we ever meet our daddy?" Rachel's heart clenched. She had always been honest with her children about their father, explaining that he had chosen not to be part of their lives. But seeing them grow up without him, seeing Nathan's curiosity about the man who had given him his eyes and his serious nature, made her question whether she had made the right choice in protecting them from the truth. "I don't know, sweetheart," she said softly. "But you know what? We have each other, and that's what matters most." "But I want to know what he looks like," Nathan persisted. "Hope says he must be tall like me." Rachel kissed his forehead. "Maybe someday you'll meet him. But for now, it's just us, and we're pretty amazing, aren't we?" Nathan nodded, but she could see the question still lingering in his eyes. That night, Rachel sat in her living room looking at the photos of Nathan and Hope that covered every surface. They were James's children too, whether he acknowledged it or not. They deserved to know their father, even if he had chosen to abandon them. She made a decision that would change everything. The next morning, she called her lawyer, a woman named Jennifer, who had helped her with her divorce years ago. "I need to establish paternity for my children," Rachel said, "and I need to know what my options are." Jennifer was quiet for a moment. "Rachel, are you sure about this? You've built a good life. Why complicate it now?" "Because my children deserve to know their father. He deserves to know them, even if he doesn't want to." "All right, I'll draw up the paperwork." "But Rachel, this could get ugly. If he's refused to acknowledge them for 6 years, he might not welcome this development." "I know, but I can't protect them from the truth forever. They need to know where they come from." Jennifer agreed to handle the legal aspects, but Rachel knew that wouldn't be enough. She needed to confront James directly, to look him in the eye and demand that he acknowledge his children. The wedding announcement had listed the venue and date. Rachel found herself making plans to attend, not as a guest, but as a mother, seeking justice for her children. She arranged for her neighbor Mrs. Chen to watch Nathan and Hope, telling them she had a business meeting in the city. Toward the venue, her hands trembled on the steering wheel. She wasn't sure what she would say or how James would react, but she knew she had to try. The wedding was everything she had expected: elegant, expensive, and filled with people who had never known hardship. Rachel parked her modest car among the luxury vehicles and took a deep breath. She had come this far. There was no turning back now. As she walked toward the entrance, she thought about Nathan and Hope, sleeping peacefully at home. They were the reason she was here, the reason she had found the courage to face her past. Whatever happened next, she would face it for them. The wedding venue was everything Rachel had expected: crystal chandeliers, white roses, and guests dripping in diamonds and designer gowns. She stood at the back of the church in her simple black dress, watching the ceremony unfold like a scene from a movie she didn't want to be in. James stood at the altar in his expensive tuxedo, looking every inch the successful businessman he had become. Beside him, Catherine was radiant in her designer wedding gown, smiling with the confidence of someone who had never doubted her place in the world. Rachel's heart pounded as the officiant reached the crucial moment. If anyone has any reason why these two should not be wed, speak now or forever hold your peace. The silence stretched out, heavy with tradition and expectation. Rachel took a deep breath, stepped forward, and spoke clearly. "I object." The gasp that rippled through. The church was audible. Heads turned, whispers began, and phones were quickly raised to capture the drama. James's face went pale as he saw her, and Catherine's smile faltered. "Ma'am, this is highly irregular," the officiant said, clearly flustered. "On what grounds do you object?" Rachel walked down the aisle, her heels clicking against the marble floor. She kept her eyes on James, watching as recognition and fear warred in his expression. "I object because the groom is about to make vows about honesty and commitment. While he has 2 children he has never met or acknowledged." The silence was deafening. Catherine looked at James with shock and confusion. "James, what is she talking about?" Rachel reached into her purse and pulled out a folder. "DNA test results. Birth certificates. Your twins, James. Nathan and Hope Turner. They're 6 years old, and they look exactly like you." Victoria rose from her seat in the front row, her face a mask of fury. "Security, remove this woman immediately. But Rachel wasn't finished. I tried to tell you when I first found out I was pregnant. You wouldn't take my calls. Your mother threatened to destroy me if I pursued it, so I raised them alone. They deserve to know their father, even if their father doesn't deserve them. She placed the folder on the altar and turned to address the stunned congregation. Nathan asks me every night why he doesn't have a daddy. Hope wonders if her father would be proud of her artwork. I've protected them from the truth for 6 years, but I won't lie to them anymore. Catherine stared at James, her bouquet trembling in her hands. Is this true? James opened his mouth, but no words came. The man who had once been so quick to dismiss Rachel now stood frozen, unable to speak. It's true, Rachel said quietly. And here's the proof. She pulled out her phone and showed the wedding guests a photo of Nathan and Hope at their recent birthday party. The resemblance to James was unmistakable. Nathan had his father's serious eyes and square jaw, while Hope had inherited his dark hair and determined expression. They're beautiful, aren't they? Rachel's voice was steady, but her eyes were bright with unshed tears. They're smart and funny and kind. Nathan wants to be a scientist, and Hope wants to be an artist. They're perfect, and they're yours, James. They've always been yours. The church erupted in whispers and shocked conversations. Catherine dropped her bouquet and fled down the aisle, her wedding dress trailing behind her. Victoria tried to follow, but James's best man caught her arm. James finally found his voice. Rachel, I didn't know. You didn't want to know, Rachel corrected. There's a difference. She walked back down the aisle, leaving the folder on the altar. At the church doors, she paused and turned back one last time. I didn't come here to ruin your wedding, James. I came here to give you a chance to be a father. What you do with that chance is up to you. But Nathan and Hope deserve better than a man who runs away from responsibility. As she walked out into the bright afternoon sun, Rachel felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She had done what she came to do. She had spoken the truth, and now James would have to live with the consequences of his choices. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Chen. The kids are asking when you'll be home. Hope made you a drawing. Rachel smiled and got into her car. She was going home to her children, her brave, beautiful children who had made her life complete. Whatever happened next, she knew they would face it together. As she drove away from the church, she caught a glimpse of James in her rearview mirror, standing on the steps in his wedding tuxedo, holding the folder that contained proof of the family he had abandoned. For the first time in 6 years, he would have to confront the truth about who he really was. But Rachel's story wasn't about James anymore. It was about Nathan and Hope, and the love that had carried them all through the darkest times. It was about the strength to rebuild after everything falls apart, and the courage to demand what's right even when it's difficult. She had been told she would never be a mother. Instead, she had become the mother of 2 incredible children, and discovered that sometimes the greatest gifts come from the most unexpected places. The rest of their story was still being written, and Rachel couldn't wait to see what came next.